Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Syria in reversed momentum. Rebels are now killing one another and alienating the people they claim they're fighting for. The Assad regime has regained lost ground and is on the offensive. In the meantime, Western powers are showing reluctance to provide arms to the rebels. Is it now time to consider a process to stop the violence and talk peace? To crosstalk the war in Syria, I'm joined by Kelly Vlahos in Washington. She's a journalist at antiwar.com. Also in Washington, we have Ahsan Arari. He's an independent defense consultant and author of the book, The Great Powers versus the Hegemon. And in London, we cross to Kapil Kamareddy. He's a writer and a journalist. All right, folks, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Kelly, if I can go to you first in Washington, with the stalemate and with Assad's forces gaining ground, isn't it time more to take seriously the peace plan that has been proposed by the United States and Russia?
Yes, I think it is time to consider that, but the question is, can you get both sides to the table? And I don't think that there is any indication right now that either side is ready to get there. There seems to be a stalemate on the diplomatic process. The Russians and Assad and the Iranians, to a certain extent, do not want preconditions on coming to the talks. America wants preconditions. The West wants preconditions. So right there, you have the ultimate stalemate. In the meantime, you have the U.S. saying it's going to start providing arms. We know they've already been providing arms to the rebel groups, which provides another cause of stalemate at the diplomatic level. So, yes, talks would be fantastic. That would avert more deaths, adding to the 90,000 plus now, but can we get there? We don't know yet.
Ahsan, in Washington, aren't there enough arms already floating around awash in Syria now? Why do they need more arms?
Looking at it from the United States perspective, I mean, the ideal situation would be what just Kelly described, talk. But I think she also is quite right in saying that the U.S. side, they want preconditions, but the Russian side and the Assad side, they don't. Here's the problem. The U.S. side, the Saudis, Qataris, and the Syrian fighters would like to see Assad gone. Russia and Iran, on the other hand, they absolutely want no part of that option. You see, Syria today is the last stronghold for Russia. If Assad goes, there is no more place for Russia.
I think it has a lot less to do with Russian. It has a lot less to do with Russian foreign policy than interventions in general around the world. Kapil, if I can go to you in London, because it isn't a Russia-specific situation. As a matter of fact, Russia is the one that proposed the peace process.
Well, one of the things I have to say that Syria is also the last bastion of Arab secularism. What we have to recognize is that though we dislike Assad, though he has... This is not a genocide, this is a civil war. A lot of people have died as a consequence of two sides fighting each other. Assad has a substantial constituency within Syria that supports him. This constituency is made up of Shiites, it's made up of Alawis, it's made up of Christians, and also many secular Syrians who have seen the rebels, their conduct, and have moved back, have pledged renewed allegiance to Assad. And we mustn't disregard that fact. To set the precondition that Assad must go or no talks is to prolong the conflict, is more dead bodies on the streets of Syria.
Kelly, jump in. Because this is
I think you're over...
Okay, Ahsan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're overstating... I think you're overstating Assad's constituency. Yes, he has support of all those people that you have mentioned, but that support is also shrinking. He doesn't have support of 90% of the population, which is, Sunni Arabs. So the bottom line for Assad is that time is gone for him to negotiate and stay. Unfortunately, Russia doesn't seem to understand that. Unfortunately, Iran doesn't seem to understand that. And of course, on the U.S. side, I think the United States is being very coy. I think Obama is being very smart.
I'm afraid, I think,
by staying on the sideline and figuring out who
that.
wins.
Go ahead, London, jump in.
Yes, I think the problem is not that Assad, time has run out for Assad. These prophecies about Assad's imminent departure, his imminent collapse, have been going on for 2 years. He's been in power. I met a Pakistani Shia in Syria, a pilgrim who'd been living in Syria for 16 years. And he told me if everyone in Syria wanted Assad to go, he would be gone. This is not to say that a substantial number of Syrians don't want him to go. They do want him to go. But there is a constituency in Syria that supports Assad. The problem is that we don't have, the West doesn't have anyone to bring to the negotiating table. The Syrian opposition is completely fractured. Who represents the Syrian opposition? Could Hassan perhaps give me 5 names that represent the Syrian opposition? Who can go to the negotiating table and talk to Assad?
No, I cannot give you 5 names, but that's the point. In the post-Arab awakening Middle East, great powers are they have lost their influence forever. So that is one of the dilemmas. You know, the countries who can bring about some sort of a meaningful peace are not United States and Russia. They might be Saudi Arabia and Iran, because the Saudi-Iranian rivalry
that's a very depressing thought.
in Syria.
That's a very depressing thought that Saudi Arabia would be playing that role. Kelly, go right ahead, because they're certainly fueling on the jihadist activities in Syria.
Absolutely. I think this, this sounds very trite, but it all depends on your point of view. When you asked the question of whether we should, or I think you asked the question that whether we should be still arming the rebels. Well, if you want to continue the military stalemate, yeah, I think continuing to support the rebel groups, whether those weapons get in the wrong hands or not, will continue the civil war, the ongoing conflict, and prevent Assad from having an ultimate victory. The ultimate detriment is of the people who will suffer the most. If you are Assad's group, on the other side, the Russians, the Iranians, it would be better to get this to a bargaining table, stop arming the rebels, so that Assad would continue maybe getting the momentum on the battlefield and feel as though he is in control enough to come to the talks. If he is in control of those talks and there are no preconditions for him to go, that is, that would be the best scenario on that side. But the United States wants to see him go. So, it is a huge mess, but it's all from your point of view.
Right, why should it have to be all about just one man?
United States.
That's ridiculous. Let's go to London here.
Perhaps one way to look at this,
Peter,
perhaps one way to look at this is not to look at Syrians as Assad's people or the opposition's people, as outsiders at least, just for a moment. Look at them all as Syrians. If the stalemate continues, what we call stalemate, as though this war is frozen between two sides, what happens is more Syrians die. So to place the emphasis on Assad's exit is to prolong this war. The fact is that Assad is in charge of substantial portions of Syria. He may not control a majority of the territories, but many of the people who were living in the rebel-controlled territories have migrated to territories that are now controlled by the government. So rather than dividing Syrians as Assad's people or the opposition people, perhaps we should look at them as Syrians and consider that they continue to leave the country as refugees. Their lives have been devastated. This is a mountain of fire. This is a forest fire. And what we seem to be doing is trying to douse it with more petrol. That's just killing more Syrians. This is what would the polite euphemism be? Very, very stupid.
Okay. Hassan, in Washington, go ahead.
Unfortunately, the whole game is about removing Assad. You said
Why?
It's unfortunate that
that's only for one side.
Well, that's
for one side.
What's going to happen, Hassan, if Assad were to leave?
Hassan, is it worth it? For one man?
From a personal level, of course not. From a personal level, of course not. But we're talking about great power games here. We're talking about clashing geostrategic interests here. We're talking about Iran seeking an upper hand, and it sees the only way to have its influence in the Levant is through status quo. Russia has a similar notion. The United States, on the other hand, has shrinking strategic advantage, and the United States is doing everything by playing smart, by making sure that it goes with the side which emerges as a winner, or at least a substantial winner, which means going with a group which is not a terrorist group in terms of ousting Assad. And once Assad is gone, then of course it's going to be a mess. I mean, we're talking about a mess now. It's going to be a bigger mess after Assad is gone. I said, I mean, from as far as I'm concerned, as I see the future, it's not if he's it's when he's gone.
Well, he will go eventually.
What we
Come
have
on.
to do is
he will go eventually. Kelly, jump in.
I think we have to do
Kelly,
is
jump in. Go ahead.
We have to.
Go ahead, Kelly.
I think the question here is, and I would like to hear this from our other guests, is if you did remove Assad from the situation, would there still be today this massive sectarian divide in Syria, in essence, a partitioned country? Have we got to the point where even without Assad, you would have a civil war? I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what the others have to say on this, because if we do remove Assad, there are these long-standing issues. You have the great power game, but you also have the Sunni-Shia conflagration that is happening all over the Middle East right now. I don't know if that's going to go away if Assad is removed, or if he stays and there's some
that is not going to go away.
Okay, Kelly, I have to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Syria. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the civil war in Syria. Okay, Assad in Washington, Kelly brought up a very good point. What would Syria look like if Assad suddenly left, okay? How would you imagine it? Would the civil war come to an end magically?
No, absolutely not. Whenever Assad goes, it's going to be a mess. That is why, see, I would like to see him gone right now, so before the situation gets even messier. Once he's gone, which means Syria is going to be a very similar place as Egypt. But you see, some major powers can get together and help these insurgents and other elements to come to some sort of a status quo. Now, Kelly made a good point that the Shia-Sunni sectarian divide is going to be there. It has been there. It has been there for 1,400 years. Now, after Iraq, it has intensified. After Syria, it is further intensified. But just because it has a potential, an ominous potential of becoming intensified, there is no sense in saying, okay, let's prolong the war. Let's the butcher of Damascus stay in power, and let's continue with this and kind of.
Well, Assad, do you want to see the butchers? Do you want to see the butchers in the opposition win too? I mean, they're not nice people. I mean, eating a heart in front of a camera.
No, they're not. They're not. That's why I want these great powers to help bring about some sort of a rapprochement right now, so that.
Well, Assad, I tell you, the Russian peace plan idea has been on the table for a year, and it's not getting much traction. Let's go to London. Kapil, jump in. What would Syria?
I think
go ahead.
Syria is a pluralistic country. It's in the 4th century. I think the poet Malaya just said, "Syria, one world, my country." It's a homeland of so many different sects and so many different religions. For the last 50 years, what has been happening to Christians in Egypt, for instance, the Copts in Egypt, would be unthinkable in Syria. With the beginning of this revolution, I met Christians who said, we never thought of ourselves as Christians before the rebels came and told us, you are Christians, you have to leave your homes. So 80,000 people were expelled from their own homes in Homs. These are ancient communities who've lived in peace with their neighbors. Today in Syria, there is no single entity that speaks for even a modest majority of Syrians. You get rid of the state, you get rid of Assad, what happens is that his constituency that supports him will begin another insurgency. This is not going to be the end of the civil war, but it will be the elevation of the civil war to a new, even more violent phase. I think Assad has got it wrong. He seems to be under this impression that you get rid of Saddam. Sorry, I'm telling you the solution. You seem to be under the impression, before I get to my solution, may I just make a point about what your solution is? That you seem to be thinking that you get rid of Assad and suddenly the great powers go inside and they macromanage the things, they put everything together. They couldn't do that in Afghanistan, they couldn't do that in Iraq, they're not going to be able to do that in Syria.
Facilitate, not micromanage.
Yes, well, facilitate. Well, it's a synonym for macromanage.
Yeah, but that's assuming that it's going to be.
How exactly do you envisage that happening?
It's going to be a pro-Western government there. That's what Hassan is saying, essentially, between the lines. Well, and that probably isn't going to happen. Kelly, jump in, because what we see now is a partition.
If Hassan believes that it's going to be a pro-Western government, he is an inhabitant of Cloud Cuckoo Land. It's not going to be a pro-Western government. I'm terribly sorry to say.
It's going to be a pro-Syrian government. I'm not advocating a pro-Western government, not necessarily. Hopefully it'll be pro-Western, but that's not my ultimate precondition.
Okay.
But Syrians themselves are divided on what constitutes like pro-Syrian, Assad.
Okay, Kelly, it looks to me that the country could be partitioned, okay? Assad will stay in his part of the country here, and the rest of it will be given up to jihadists. Not a pretty picture.
No, not a pretty picture. I mean, what I'd like to know myself, and I don't have a crystal ball, is, I mean, what is the solution to keep Assad in power? Is the solution to bring Assad to the table to create some sort of national unity government that incorporates all of these different factions? Or is the solution just to go back to the way it was, which obviously wasn't, there was an opposition, an honest-to-goodness freedom movement that was there. There was a kernel of it. It happened. Okay, we've gotten way far away from that. But things were not good. Assad is a dictator. So what do we want? What is the solution? I understand that just taking him out and the regime change is going to come with all sorts of repercussions that we might not want to live with, just like in Iraq. I mean, that is the most recent blatant example. But what is the alternative? I'd like to know.
Okay, Kabul in London, you want to field that? It's a very good question. Let's go to London. Go ahead.
It's moved from Assad is, you know, Syria was a dictatorship, a very repressive dictatorship, where the government was conscious of every individual's private lives. That dictatorship had to go. But when the rebellion began, even before it could spread through Syria, it was expropriated by regional powers with their own interests. Saudi Arabia started supplying arms. The rebellion began in March in 2011. In April, there was a massacre of 72 people. By June, the people who were living under this repressive regime were already armed, were already taking on the mightiest army in the Arab world, in the Middle East, after Israel, the second mightiest army in the Middle East. They were already taking it on. This would have been impossible without the supply of weapons, and the supply of weapons came from Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia had its own reasons to do that. Qatar amplified the struggle of the rebels with its news network. Turkey internationalized this conflict. The dictatorship, what was originally a conflict between a dictatorship and an oppressed population, evolved into something bigger, into a civil war. We are looking at it through the lens of, oppressed people fighting a dictator, but this has turned into something entirely different. To apply that old solution to this new problem is to create something we may never be able to manage again.
And you probably will break up the region for a very, very long time. Hassan, you want to jump in Washington?
It will.
Go
Syria
ahead.
will never go back. Syria will never go back to being what it was.
Go ahead, Hassan, go ahead.
We are not creating any, first of all, I have several objections. Who is this we? We, the West, we're not creating anything. If anybody is creating anything in Syria, it's going to be the Syrians. Now, Kelly mentioned any possible solution with Assad. There are zero chances of any solutions with Assad. Assad is history. He doesn't know it, and the events will prove me right. The days of Assad are gone. Now Syria is going to reemerge. Now perhaps it's going to be a divided state, but it will never be a democracy, I don't think, in the short run. And it is not likely to be a pro-Western state. So, you know, it's just like, take a look at what's happening in Iraq. I think it's going to be a very similar situation, except Syria is much more pluralistic than Iraq. So in that sense, it's going to be a larger mess. That's why I would like to see the conflict end now. That's how I would like to see Assad go.
Then the Saudis and the Qataris should stop arming those people. Hassan, would you agree with that? The Saudis should stop sending arms now.
Saudi should stop sending arms to the jihadis. I totally agree with that. I don't endorse that. But the question is, who are you going to arm? And do you have any control over who gets the arms? You see, it's like the Soviet situation in Afghanistan. So it is a mess. See, that's why. Let me repeat. Obama is playing his cards beautifully. He's staying on the sideline and he's saying, "Okay, you guys, you fight it out." And once a group emerges that is acceptable to us,
a more beautiful scenario would be to talk peace more and not arming more. Kelly.
Yeah, I think, and you know, Hassan had brought up Obama and the administration. I'm sure many of your viewers had seen maybe some of the testimony by our new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, yesterday, who called the Security Council, the UN Security Council, a disgrace for not getting more involved in stopping the conflict in Syria, with the implication that we are not, or the Security Council isn't doing enough to sanction and get rid of Assad. So you have this conflict going on within the administration. On one side, you have the military who have, for months, have been saying that we should not get involved in Syria. And then you have people within the administration, including Susan Rice and Samantha Power, who are calling for more intervention. We have part of the Congress is saying, let's arm the rebels. Some in Congress saying, let's institute no-fly zones and even ground troops. And then you have the other half of Congress saying, wait a minute, if we continue to arm these rebels, we don't know where our weapons are going. They're going into the wrong hands. So there is this conflict within the administration, which is sending all sorts of mixed signals. And we have Obama, who said that we will start arming the rebels. And then 2 weeks later, the Congress says, whoa, we're not ready to do that. So I think the lack of leadership, the lack of direction, the wishy-washiness of the United States is indicating that I don't think that we're going to be much of a player in any of this in the end.
In London, let's go.
Or a bad player.
No.
Kapil, in London, you want to reply to that? Because, you know, you have Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the United States. They're allies, but they have very different interests in Syria, radically different.
Yes, I think Obama has been pushed into a corner. He made that remark. The Republican establishment has, from the beginning, been trying to portray him as a lily-livered president who's been leading us from the behind. That's their phrase. He's leading us from behind. So, in order to appear tough, he said that.
Yeah, this is a guy that has a weekly kill list. This is a guy that has a weekly kill list. Okay.
That's right. In order to appear tough, he made this statement, which I think he's regretting. He said, "If Assad uses chemical weapons, that's a red line." That immediately created an incentive for people who wanted to induce American intervention, and they forged evidence saying Assad used chemical weapons, which, frankly, is insulting to the intelligence of every ordinary citizen, because chemical weapons were last used in Iraq. In Halabja, and for the chemical weapons to be used, Saddam Hussein had to fly 14 sorties, I think, and that killed 5,000 people. Now we're being told that chemical weapons were used with such precision that only 25 to 50 people were killed by a government that is winning, a government to which 250,000 soldiers still pledge allegiance. Why would this government
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to jump in here. We've run out of time. Many thanks today to my guests in Washington and in London. And I want to thank our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules.
I love you.